Next, we'll go ahead and pivot to the big news in the financial sector the past week or so, and that's been the implosion over at New York Community Bank. Now, up until fairly recently, New York Community Bank was the 29th largest bank in the country. However, they recently disclosed some bad commercial loans on their books, and you might be thinking, bad commercial loans. This is giving me flashbacks to Signature Bank from last year. Well, wouldn't you know it, on their way to shutting down, who bought a number of the loans and deposits from Signature Bank? New York Community Bank did. Will New York Community Bank survive? Who knows? But the portion of this story that I really want to go deeper into is this concept of a bad loan. Now, more and more, we're hearing about property owners with buildings that they've invested millions of dollars in just walking away, giving the keys back to the lender. It doesn't make sense. Why would anyone do this? Let's go ahead and do an example together. The example we're going to go over together is assuming that back in 2019, you were interested in buying an office building. Now, we're going to be doing a number of calculations together. If you happen to be listening to the audio version of this podcast, I'm actually going to recommend that you jump over to YouTube. It's going to be a heck of a lot easier for learning purposes if you can visualize what we're doing. For those that just can't make the switch, I'll do my best to give you the play-by-play. However, you would be better served getting eyes on this. So the example we're going to be going over is you're looking at a building that generates $150,000 worth of income and has $50,000 worth of yearly expenses. So the first item we're going to look to solve for is what is our net operating income, our NOI, and that's simply our income minus expenses. When we're looking at commercial buildings, we're going to run into a term known as the cap rate or the capitalization rate. And that's simply, in residential properties, you find a value by looking at what similar properties have sold for. So if you own a colonial in Niskayuna, in order to get the value, you're going to look at other colonial sales recently in your street, in your neighborhood, and that's how you're going to be able to base your value. For commercial properties, because no one commercial property is going to be identical to the other, it's really impossible to use that type of comparison to value a property. So instead they say, okay, in the Class A neighborhoods in this particular city, office buildings are trading at a 6.5% cap. Or in this part of town, warehouses are trading at a 9% cap. So in our example, back in 2019, the office building city where we were looking, office buildings were trading at a 6.5% capitalization rate. So our mission now is to solve for what is our property value. So we know what the capitalization rate is, and we know what the NOI is. And the equation we're looking at is cap rate is equal to our net operating income divided by the property value. Or, written another way, is net operating income divided by cap rate equals property value. So now we can solve for property value. So we have $100,000 worth of NOI divided by the known cap rate in the area of 6.5%, gives us a property value of just over $1.5 million. The next question is, okay, we know what the property is worth. We know what we're willing to pay for it. How much debt can we take on? What kind of mortgage are we going to be able to secure for the property? Our lender says to us, okay, we like the property, looks good. We're willing to issue you a loan based on a debt service coverage ratio, DSCR, of 1.2. What does this mean? Well, essentially what they're saying is we want the net operating income to be 120% of the debt payment. So if we know, okay, they're looking for a 1.2% debt service coverage ratio, and we know what the net operating income is, well, then we can solve. So it's going to be $100,000 divided by 1.2 gives us an allowable debt burden of just over $83,000 for the year. The lender then says, okay, the terms are going to be 5.5% is going to be the interest rate. It's going to be a 5-year term, so you can borrow for 5 years on a 20-year amortization scale. So now we're going to bring in our trusty loan calculator and we're going to figure out, okay, we know it's going to be a 20-year loan and we know what the interest rate the bank is going to charge us is. How much of a yearly, what kind of mortgage can we take on? So they're saying 1.2, 5.5% interest rate, 20 years, and we have up to $83,000 to spend per year. That is actually going to land us with a mortgage of right around $1 million. So based on the information that the bank said they were comfortable in lending, we are able to borrow $1 million. So we know what the property value is. We now know what the mortgage value is. Then the rest is how much we need to bring to the table. So it's going to be the 1.5-ish minus the mortgage that we're going to be taking on. And that's going to leave just over $500,000 for investors, so people buying the building, how much they need to bring to the table in order to purchase the property. That's in 2019. Now we're going to jump ahead to 2024. What's changed? Well, we bought an office building, and unfortunately, people aren't working from the office anymore. So our income has actually fallen quite a bit. We've had some vacancies. People aren't renewing their leases, or if they are renewing, they're actually in decreasing amounts from what they were back in 2019. So our income has taken a bit of a hit. And on top of that, inflation, things are getting more expensive to fix. Our expenses actually went up quite a bit. So we have a reduction in income and we have an increase in expenses. Our NOI, so again, that's our income minus expenses, when we purchased the building was $100,000. Now, due to reductions in income, increasing expenses, the NOI has fallen to $60,000. To make matters worse, because office buildings are in less demand today than they were back in 2019, buyers aren't willing to pay as much. So what was a 6.5% cap, buyers today are now saying, I need a better return. I need more of a money in order to take on what's looking to be a decreasing value in terms of desirability, office buildings. So instead of a 6.5%, I'm now demanding a 7.5% in order to buy your building. We're going to go through our same calculations in order to figure out what our property is currently worth that we did back in 2019. So that's our net operating income divided by the cap rate. And that gives us a 2024 property value of $800,000. Pretty painful if you're a property owner. I mean, that's a significant fall off. And again, that's a slight reduction in income, slight increase in expenses. All of a sudden, our property is worth roughly half of what it was 5 years ago. And you got to keep in mind, we've had 5 years of pay down on the mortgage. So originally we borrowed $1 million. So at this point, 5 years later, with the principal pay down, we're probably somewhere in the $850,000 currently owed. So now the 5 years is up because the bank gave us a 5-year term. So we're now going back to the bank and we need to refinance our property. We need to extend the loan. We know what the property is worth today. The bank is still saying, yep, we're willing to offer you a loan on a 1.2 debt service coverage ratio. So we're solving again for, okay, what's that number? So we know 1.2 is the coverage ratio. We have a NOI of $60,000. Back in 2019, we saw that we could take on an $83,000 debt burden on a yearly basis. Now we're down to $50,000. So we're going to go back to our loan calculator and we're going to look at, well, how much of a loan can we take on for that amount? And we say, okay, it's going to be a 20-year amortization schedule. Interest rates are higher than they were back then, so that's another whammy. So not only is the capitalization rate not working in our favor, but interest rates also went up. So now instead of borrowing at 5.5%, now we're borrowing at 8%. So the maximum allowable loan is $500,000. We are now in a bit of a pickle because we do not have the funds available in order to refinance the building. So we owe $850,000 from the original $1 million mortgage. And the lender is saying we're comfortable lending $500,000. So there's a $350,000 shortfall that needs to somehow be made up. What are the ways to remedy this? Well, you can come in, you need to, whether it's just yourself or I'm assuming you probably had business partners when you bought the building, you need to have a serious, come to Jesus conversation in terms of if we are to save the building, we need to invest an additional $350,000 to save this, or the bank is going to come take it, right? We cannot pay off the debt given what the building is currently worth. Can we try to sell it? Well, selling is going to be difficult because not only are you going to have costs associated with selling the building, but even if you sell it, we know that it's not worth the debt that's currently owed. So you're either looking to inject $350,000 into saving a building that today is worth $500,000, or, and this is what a lot of owners are doing, they're giving the keys back to the lender and they're saying either A, we can't come up with the money, or B, and this is more realistically, we don't think it would be a good investment for us to fund an additional $350,000. Yes, we're going to lose the initial investment of the over $500,000, but sometimes throwing good money after bad doesn't work out well. So they're electing to say, you know what, we're going to cut our losses. Lender, here are the keys, go do with it what you want. And this is why we're seeing commercial buildings fail in the rate and at the scale that they are. So when you see examples of why people are giving back keys to the property that, again, they've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, possibly millions of dollars into investing, into renovating, into getting leased up, this is why. It's because it's essentially a math problem. And the math for a lot of property owners, given what cap rates have done, given what interest rates have done, given what demand for certain segments of commercial real estate have done, just doesn't pencil.